Lavenda has studied Nazism in all its forms for decades, but it has only been in the last 10 years or so that he has realized that most research into Nazism, and especially post-war Nazism and the flight of SS officers into underground systems and cells, has focused primarily on Europe and the Americas. It was only when he began research in Southeast Asia on unrelated matters that he discovered there was a large and energetic Nazi Party apparatus in Indonesia and elsewhere before, during, and even after World War II. There was an important and dangerous Nazi presence in North Africa and the Middle East. Still, the tendency has been to treat the different geographical spheres of influence as separate matters, unrelated in any way. Some Nazis fled to Argentina and Chile, for instance, and others to Southeast Asia and Australia. And still others, thousands more, wound up in the former Soviet Union. If we step back a little and look at the globe from the vantage point of 30,000 feet, we can get a glimpse of a very different kind of network, populated not only by concentration camp guards and sadistic SS officers, but also by scientists, engineers, factory administrators, and even civilian business experts. By focusing on Odessa, what we are using as an umbrella term for the underground SS officers' networks, we lose sight of the larger picture. By 1944, the Nazi secret weapons research at Peenemünde and at Nordhausen came under the direct control of the SS and not the Wehrmacht. Thus, after the war, groups like Odessa were not only mechanisms for rescuing individual persons accused of war crimes by the Nuremberg tribunals, men like Josef Mengele and Adolf Eichmann, but also a means of moving technical, scientific, and engineering teams and resources around the world. As Lavenda began to gather more and more information from obscure sources, diaries, address books, and other documents, this picture came into sharper focus. One of the most cogent arguments against a Nazi secret weapon appearing as a flying saucer over North American skies, the Arnold sighting for instance, is the fact that such a technological advance would require the existence of a sophisticated supply chain of metal parts, scientific instruments, and a large and presumably unconcealable factory, elaborate wind tunnels, and state-of-the-art test apparatus and heavy machinery, perhaps hundreds of engineers and laborers, exotic raw materials. The Third Reich had been decimated, its factories destroyed, its scientists and engineers in prisons or recruited under programs like Paperclip, Alsace, Operation Big, Operation Lusty, Operation Seahorse, the Fedon Mission, and similar operations in the Soviet Union and France. There was no way that something like a flying saucer or a Foo Fighter could be designed, developed, and constructed in secret in the immediate post-war period, not by a vanquished foe with no territory of its own and its personnel scattered to the four corners of the world. It would be like the Manhattan Project taking place piecemeal in scattered underground labs in areas remote from population centers or aerial surveillance, and staffed by former concentration camp guards, construction workers, and physics students. Of course, the Manhattan Project did take place in scattered remote areas, but with the financial and political might and considerable resources of the U.S. government and its military behind it. The Kenneth Arnold sighting took place only 2 years after the end of the war in Europe. The global economy was in shambles. Nazis were hiding underground when they were not in custody. The German economy was on life support. What is generally forgotten is that the Reich had made plans to salvage what it could of its resources, both material and intellectual, in the days after the D-Day invasion of June 1944 and the subsequent attempt on Hitler's life during Operation Valkyrie on July 20th, 1944. This was the famous and controversial Maison Rouge meeting that took place in Strasbourg on August 10, 1944. A rat line for technology. Maison Rouge set the post-war program for the Reich and particularly for the future plans of the SS. The immediate goal of the secret meeting at the Maison Rouge Hotel in Strasbourg, chaired by SS officers with a need to know, was to advise the assembled leaders of Germany's industrial machine that they had to expatriate as much of their wealth and know-how as possible and do so immediately. These assets would get distributed throughout the world, through front companies in some cases, and in others through wholly owned subsidiaries of the parent companies. Trains carrying gold bullion wound their way from Germany and the occupied territories to friendly regimes in Spain and Portugal, and from there to other locations worldwide. 40 tons of gold, for instance, was shipped from Portugal to Macau, a Portuguese colony. From there, 20 tons made its way into China, and another 20 tons to Indonesia. More gold was sent to secure banking facilities in Switzerland, where some of it was used to finance terror groups in North Africa and the Middle East, and to support the flight of war criminals to friendly countries abroad. And it was not only gold. As revealed in a lengthy series of reports to Congress in the summer and fall of 1945, the Reich had been at work not only moving their technical assets abroad wherever they could, but also in disguising their ownership. Dummy corporations had been set up like Russian dolls, nested corporations whose ultimate ownership was nearly impossible to trace, especially in the days before computers and internet access. Some of these were revealed and shut down. Others escaped scrutiny, and they were everywhere. This included massive industrial corporations such as Krupp, as well as smaller tech-heavy companies engaged in weapons research. Much of this was facilitated by former Nazi superstars such as SS officer Otto Skorzeny, who in the 1950s actually was involved in the construction of air bases in Europe, American Air Force bases. The congressional report mentioned earlier is replete with details of this distributed industrialization project of the Reich, which was not merely an attempt by apolitical German CEOs and financiers to salvage what they could of their crumbling infrastructure, but was directly under the authority of Nazi Party functionaries, including most especially the SS. A glance at the congressional report is revealing. Countries in Latin America are listed alphabetically, along with names of German companies, and in some cases, Japanese companies, that were closed or otherwise liquidated or reorganized due to their Nazi associations. As an example, Argentina had more than 100 firms listed in the report, many with familiar names such as Thyssen, AEG, AGFA, Mitsubishi, Siemens, and Zeiss. Brazil also had more than 100 German firms on the list, including German banks, shipping firms, and chemical and industrial enterprises. Weirdly, the relatively small nation of Guatemala had more than 200 German-associated firms, including more than 70 fincas, or farms, that had done business with the Nazis or had Nazi ownership. And all of this was only the Latin American contingent. When one includes North America, specifically the United States, with some of its firms famously proscribed under the Trading with the Enemy Act, and countries in Africa and Asia, the extent of the problem can be grasped more fully. There existed an international network of German firms, and specifically those firms that had provided scientific and technical expertise to the Reich, as well as banking and financial institutions. Some of these were branch operations that had been established in many cases before the war had started, but which continued to function during the war, even in countries that had joined the Allies and officially declared war on Germany. It was up to the CEOs of these firms in the Reich to determine how best to expatriate their intellectual property as well as their liquid assets, taking advantage of these overseas branches where they could, and establishing other more clandestine operations where necessary. As it states in the report, the Department of State has abundant evidence that the Nazis, in anticipation of military defeat, made careful plans to carry on in foreign countries a wide range of activities necessary to support an eventual resurgence of German power. For this purpose, plans were made, and carried out in part, to transfer abroad sufficient funds and specially trained personnel to carry on pan-Germanic activities even while the Allied armies were in occupation of Germany. These instrumentalities, through which the Germans planned to rebuild their military, economic, and political strength in foreign countries, were principally the following. First, the large foreign industrial concerns owned or controlled by such firms as IG Farben, Siemens, Bosch, and Telefunken. Second, scientific research laboratories located in foreign countries for the development of new weapons and new industrial processes in
age. He rarely, if ever, talked politics, and he did not express strong beliefs. One of his friends even remembers him as a particularly good debater in school because, quote, he could argue either side of a proposition without missing a beat. When he did express political opinions, they were generally conservative. One friend noted that the only time he saw Child Rush express a strong political sentiment was after the 1960 presidential election, when Rush was 9. Quote, Rush wrote on a drywall, Kennedy won, darn, Nixon lost, shucks. So, grows up conservative because his dad is conservative, but it's clearly politics is not a big part of his life from an early age. He's not like Ben Shapiro, right? Where from the get-go he's being sort of, focused into becoming a political commentator. That does not happen with Rush Limbaugh.
Right. He's more from the darn shucks school of...
The darn shucks school of political commentary, yeah. So Rush got his first gig at age 13 working at a downtown barber shop. He later told his biographer that he liked the gig because it gave him a chance to talk to adults, who he preferred to his peers because I didn't think kids were interesting. When it came to girls, Rush was as awkward as you'd expect. He was bad at sports, heavyset, and not at all smooth. In his 1993 biography, The Rush Limbaugh Story, biographer Paul Colford recalls one particularly embarrassing incident during a game of Spin the Bottle when Rush was a teenager. He spun the bottle and it stopped pointing at the prettiest girl at the party, which is how she's described in this anecdote. Quote, she looked at him and gasped. Couldn't do it. Not with him, that is. And everyone in the room witnessed his humiliation. It was a wound he would nurse forever.
That's nice. Thank you, biographer, for that.
And it's one of those things, you know, I think there's... I'm sure this has an impact on the kind of man he becomes, but also I think most of us have a moment like that where we have a crush on some person of the opposite or the same sex, and they're not into us, and it's horribly embarrassing. It's pretty normal, and most of us don't grow up to destroy civil society and the environment, right? Yeah. We've all been there. And Rush was there too. Obviously, this is a part of whatever toxic stew gets cooked up in him. But I don't know how, it's one of those things I think you can kind of lean too much on, this is why. He was always forever humiliated by this thing, and that's why he became the man he was. Like, well, we all have that in our past, and we all don't do this shit.
It's very much like the original origin story of Lex Luthor that Superman blew out his hair. Superman was responsible for him going prematurely bald, and he became a supervillain because of this.
Yeah, and there are a lot of other bald men in that world who don't become supervillains. Yeah. So Big Rush wanted his son to become a lawyer or to do something else with a similar sort of gravitas, right? The Limbaughs were big men in Cape Girardeau. They were kind of like the primary, like the most prominent men in the entire town. And Big Rush wanted his son to follow in his footsteps and do something respectable. Didn't have to be a lawyer, go into politics, do something important, right? Do something that he can brag about to the other rich guys. Now, the fact that young Rush only ever wanted to be on the radio infuriated his father. For his part, Rush seems to suspect that his love of radio was born in part from his hatred of school. Quote, "My mother would be fixing me breakfast and I'd be listening to the guy on the radio. He'd be having fun and I was preparing to go to prison."
God, I mean, join the club, Rush.
Yeah, we all hate school. It's trash.
Everybody. It never occurred to me to relate it to the guy on the radio. Like, how come he gets to have fun? This full-grown adult, and I have to go to school.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of kids. I'll take my adopted hometown, Portland, for example. A lot of kids there who hate school. They don't destroy the entire planet. They just break Starbucks windows on the weekends, and that's much healthier, Rush. Just fuck up a Starbucks if you're nursing some rage at the educational industrial complex or whatever. So, despite his irritation, Big Rush clearly did love his son, and when Little Rush was 16, his dad used some of his local clout to get his son a part-time job at the local radio station.
Wow.
Rush started doing what you today call intern shit, fetching coffee, cleaning up, handling odd tasks here and there, and eventually he was allowed to actually introduce and play records on air. The summer before his senior year of high school, Big Rush paid for his son to attend a 6-week radio engineering course in Dallas. This was a big moment for Rush. He was away from home for the first time, living in a boarding house. He started smoking cigarettes, thank God, and he got a license that allowed him to actually run the radio without adult supervision. Once he had this, station management let him hang out alone all weekend and weekdays after school, playing records and for the first time presenting himself to an audience on air. So he gets started, and this is one of those things. His dad, clearly there are some abusive elements of their relationship. His dad is not supportive of Rush's radio career, but also his dad doesn't think it's a good idea, but also enables him, right? Like, not just gets him a job, but pays for him to get educated. So this is not a guy, I'm sure, he had his frustrations with his father. This is not a guy who grows up with a dad who just doesn't get him and refuses to support him. This is a very supportive upbringing this kid has. Even though his father's not. Yeah, exactly. So Rush, becomes kind of famous within his, the teen set at his town because he's the guy with the radio show and in high school. And he was not at all political. His most well-known bit involved reading the daily beauty tips that the Associated Press sent out back then, which he would kind of mock the beauty tips because he thought it was silly that the AP was sending out daily beauty tips, which is fair. That is a silly thing for the AP to do. Now, Rush's professional idol at this point was a guy named Larry Lujak, a Chicago DJ who was famous for his sense of humor and comedic stylings. Rush later called him the only person I ever copied. Lujak was known for audibly shuffling papers during his monologues and different bits, a tactic Limbaugh copied and used repeatedly through his decades on the air. And as in kind of...
That was like his signature bit.
No, he wasn't a bit, but it was like a thing he would do to emphasize that, I've got evidence or I've got information here, It was a thing and it was a big Rush Limbaugh thing, It's how you convince people who maybe aren't that credible that you have good information, right?
It's written down. It must be. Yeah. He's been handed this ream of paper that has information on it, so it's true. But Lujak was not a political guy, right?
He was not, and he fucking hated Rush Limbaugh because when Rush got famous in the early '90s, Rush was like, "Yeah, Larry Lujak is the only man I ever copied," and they asked Lujak about it, and his response was basically, "Fuck that guy."
Bless you, Larry
good
Lujak.
man. Yeah. You can't pick who finds you influential, you know? Yeah. So back in those days, again, being a radio DJ was pretty much the coolest thing you could do. and Rush's side job made him very popular at high school. He even signed autographs on a few occasions. The work was intoxicating, and Rush seemed to know at once that this was what he wanted to dedicate his life to doing. Obviously, his ambitions did not make his father happy, and during Rush's last year of childhood, his dad would constantly yell at him for wanting to waste his life on the radio. No amount of paternal ill will was enough to pull Rush Limbaugh away from his dream, though. He was miserable at home with his father after graduating. He enrolled in a local college just to please the old man, but he couldn't actually bring himself to go to school very often. Sometimes his mother would drive him to college just to make sure that he went. Rush came of age during one of the most exciting and tumultuous periods in U.S. history. I mean, he's literally becoming an adult in like 1968, I think. Like, some shit went down that year, you know? There's a lot of teenagers doing some exciting things. Now, given how Rush turned out, you might expect him to have been active and involved in the politics of his time, but he was not. And to hear him tell it now, or to hear him tell it when he related this to his biographer, the civil rights movement and the Vietnam years basically all passed him by. He never attended political rallies. He only dimly remembers hearing of Bobby Kennedy's death. When Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, his radio station asked him to help send out news reports for the local NBC affiliate because there were uprisings all around the country. And Rush did this, but he didn't actually engage with the news. He was not actually interested in what was happening. He was just interested in kind of the business of how news was disseminated.
Right.
Quote, this is what he said later. I remember talking to them about the broadcast business, NBC. I was 17, playing records on the radio, not commenting on news. I don't recall feeling any concern. So that is how, again, a lot of privilege. There are massive race-based uprisings in a number of U.S. cities. Hundreds of thousands of National Guard troops are called up as after the civil rights leader is assassinated. The country is on the brink of open conflict. And Rush Limbaugh, I don't give a fuck. Like, I just want to play my records, you know?
Wow.
He's just a rich white kid, you know, in the middle of Missouri. He doesn't give a shit.
It's so wild to think about someone being alive at that time.
Yeah.
And not having a strong feeling either way about anything that's going on.
Yeah, doesn't even have strong hard right sympathies. He just doesn't give a fuck about it, right?
That is like a kind of privilege that I can't even begin to fathom.
Yeah. And it is important that, like, he's not just taking the right-wing side of things where, like, fuck Martin Luther King, he was a commie. He just doesn't care. Like, none of this even makes it into his mind.
Like, the idea that you would say, Martin Luther King, who is that again?
Which guy? Bobby who got killed? Kiddo what?
Dimly aware that RFK was assassinated.
Yeah, it's quite a thing. So I'm going to quote now from a write-up in the New York Times that ably summarizes Rush Limbaugh's early 20s. Quote, love of radio eventually won out over formal education, and he dropped out of a local college after a year, appalling his parents. Then began a long, checkered odyssey, typical of radio. Limbaugh held and lost jobs in several cities, working under different names and broadcast styles. He was Rusty Sharp and Jeff Christie. He was a DJ, a newsreader, a talk host. In each place, he developed components of what would later emerge as the Limbaugh style. In Pittsburgh, he was a prankster, convincing listeners that he could see them through a new experimental picture mode. So, he's kind of like a drive-time morning DJ, like we're gonna, I don't know, I can't do the DJ voice, but like playing like sound bits and doing gags. Like, he's very, like, not even really a shock jock yet, because he's not like that's like starting to evolve in this period of time.
Right. Yeah.
I did find some audio from one of Rush's very first broadcasts in 1974 while he was still in Pittsburgh. And I think it's interesting because in it you can hear Rush in mid-transition from that drive-time DJ voice to the voice of the Rush Limbaugh who would help breed a modern American fascist movement. So here he is on WXC's Solid Rock and Gold show. So without further ado, here is Rush Limbaugh in 1974.
Also appearing with Shana and opening the show will be Billy Cook's Rainbows and Gypsies. See the exciting Dave's Dolphin rated PG, now showing at the Ardmore Drive-In, Bellevue, Bethel Cinema, Camp Moore Drive-In, Carnegie Cinema, and Cinema World. Day of the Dolphin also showing at the Hampton Plaza, McKee Cinema, Oaks, Penn Hills, Regent, and Rothschild Theaters. See Day of the Dolphin nowadays to Wickley, South Hills, South Park Drive-In, South Hills Drive-In, and Sunset View Drive-In. I certainly hope you people are writing all of this down. Don't miss a Day of the Dolphin. It is now showing at a
So, very silly, as all radio from the 1970s sounds today, right? And as most radio today sounds. But also, like, you would never have guessed based on his early performances that he was going to become what he became, right?
No. I mean, look, he has undeniably great voice.
Great voice. Yeah.
Very good at imparting information, like actual factual information. This movie is for sure playing here at this time.
Day of the Dolphin, absolutely. I can't wait to see it.
It's the exciting movie Day of the Dolphin. But that he's just straight reading things that you cannot misinterpret in any way.
Yeah.
If only he'd stuck to that. But it's so. I guess I don't want to get ahead of us, get ahead of ourselves, but the idea that this guy would not be content doing just this is like, when does it, the idea that it turns like, I don't know. Okay. I'm sorry.
We'll get to that. But I think it's fair to say this is what he loved, and he would have been perfectly happy if he could have made a good. We're getting to kind of like a Hitler at art school story, where like, maybe if he'd gotten to keep being a drive time radio DJ, things would have been better.
You know, I had a conversation with a friend of mine who also does podcasts and radio, and for neither of us, it is our thing, our first thing. But we shared we had a conversation where we shared our love of being good at reading copy. Like when you have to do ads, there is something that's weirdly satisfying about like, oh, I sound like a guy on the radio. Like I'm doing a good job at reading this and making it sound natural and whatever. And it's like isn't that enough? Isn't that enough? That it is a good feeling when you nail an ad read.
Yeah, I think everyone who does who does a job that. Like, I think pretty much everyone who has worked, there's a joy in professional competence of any type. You know, if you're working, if you're running like the cashier at a grocery store, right? When you get really good at bagging, like it's this. The kind of ecstasy of competence, right? Where you can kind of lose yourself in a task, and be like, I'm as good at this thing as I can be. Even if you don't like the job, there's a satisfaction in that.
100%. And
I think Rush was happy in this period. He wasn't rich, he wasn't influential, but he was doing a thing he loved well, and he was happy in this period in the early 70s. So his early material in Pittsburgh is interesting to me because it's exactly the opposite of what you'd expect from him. One of his reoccurring bits was the Friar Shuck Radio Ministry of the Air, where he relentlessly mocked the radio preachers that he saw coming into the station on Sundays. He thought these guys were grifters, and he hated them. The center of this bit was that no matter your problem, God would solve it if you'd send the radio preacher $100. That's interesting to me, and this is like a real like running theme in his early career. Is he made fun of preachers all the time, of the exact kind of religious grifters that later helped make him a wealthy man. It's very interesting to me. He also would read letters from fans, and at one point he read a letter that he said was from a young woman who wanted to be a DJ and was worried that her gender would hold her back. Here's what he told her on the air. This is interesting to me too. You just have to master two techniques, and I'm going to explain them right now. Number one, the use of microphone. To use it, simply turn the microphone to the on position and talk into it. The second, which is the biggie, is queuing up the record. Get the record you want to play, take it out to the appropriate shuck, slap it onto the turntable, take the arm and the needle, place it on the outside edge of the record, then turn the record till you hear the beginning of the record. Back it up a quarter of a turn, and when you get through talking, the record will start. After you have mastered those two techniques, girls, change your sex. And you can interpret that a couple of ways.
I was upset about the mansplaining about how to turn on a microphone, and then he goes, "Oh wait, you can't do it."
Well, I think there's two ways to interpret this. One of them is what you've said, Sophie, that he was just being incredibly sexist. One of them is that he might have been acknowledging anyone could do this job, but you won't be able to as a woman because of sexism in the industry. And I'm really not sure which one he was going for there.
It could be both.
Yeah, it could be both. It could be both.
There is a kind of lording it over, like, you know what, this is a dumb job, but you're still not allowed to do it.
You're still not allowed to do it, ladies. That's probably accurate. It's probably a bit of both.
But Robert, you know what all ladies are allowed to do?
Products? Is it ads, Sophie? Is it participate in capitalism as consumers?
Yes, it is participating in capitalism.
Well, ladies, stick it to Rush Limbaugh by engaging positively with the system he spent his life propping. All right. Shit.
I didn't like the phrase "stick it to Rush Limbaugh" very much.
Neither did I, Sophie. Here's some ads. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's a new year, and we're all asking ourselves versions of the same question. What do I want my 2025 story to be? Every January brings you 365 blank pages just waiting to be filled. In 2025, maybe you're ready for a plot twist, or maybe there's a part of your story that you've been wanting to revise. Life isn't about resolutions that fade by February. It's about becoming the author of your own life. You can think of therapy as an editorial partner, helping you write new chapters and create the meaningful story you deserve to live. And if you're considering therapy, you might consider giving BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is fully online, making therapy affordable and convenient, serving over 5 million people worldwide. You can access a diverse network of more than 30,000 credentialed therapists with a wide range of specialties, and you can easily switch therapists anytime at no additional cost. So, write your story with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/behind to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/behind.
Looking for excitement? Chumba Casino is here. Play anytime, play anywhere. Play on the train, play at the store, play at home, play when you're bored. Play today for your chance to win and get daily bonuses when you log in. So what are you waiting for? Don't delay. Chumba Casino is free to play. Experience social gameplay like never before. Go to Chumba Casino right now to play hundreds of games, including online slots, bingo, Slingo, and more. Live the Chumba life at ChumbaCasino.com. VGW Group. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
I'm trying to find quality brake service.
Look no further than Big O.
How about oil changes?
Big O.
Or new wheels?
Big O.
Struts?
Yep, Big O.
Alignments?
We do those too.
Shocks?
Big O.
Inspections?
Big O's the place.
Fluid changes?
Yep.
Batteries?
Yep.
Even filter changes?
See.
And the best tires on the road?
Of course, Big O's got them. Get everything you need only at your locally owned Big O Tires.
Amazon Pharmacy presents Painful Thoughts.
The guy in front of me in the pharmacy line is halfway through an incredibly detailed 17-minute story about his gout. A story likely more painful than the gout itself.
Next time, save yourself the pain and let Amazon Pharmacy deliver your meds right to your door. Amazon Pharmacy. Healthcare just got less painful.
The following is a high five moment from highfivecasino.com.
I won! Yahoo! Private, put down your phone. This is the Army.
Sarge, High Five Casino is a social casino. It's on your phone. It goes wherever you go. I win free spins, cash, prizes, free daily rewards, over 1,200 games. I won again.
Platoon, present cell phone. High Five.
High Five.
Casino.
Casino.
Win at highfivecasino.com. And download the High Five app.
High Five Casino is a social casino. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Play responsibly. Conditions apply. See website for details.
High Five Casino.
We're back. We're back from those ads. And Paul, I can see the glow on your face that only comes upon a man's face the first time that he gets to help advertise the fine products and services brought to us by the people at Raytheon. Are you feeling good, Paul, about now you are inextricably tied to wonderful products like the R9X knife missile?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As a boy growing up in Philadelphia, I dreamed of advertising for missiles.
That's what everyone wants to do, right?
Yeah.
Since cavemen painted on walls, they dreamed of Raytheon, and now we are in the privileged position of getting to sell their products, and I couldn't be happier.
Here's what sucks. Raytheon is such a cool name.
It is a great name.
It's so good.
Yeah, I mean, this ongoing bit I do, I often joke, like the R9X missile, I think is made by Lockheed. Raytheon's guidance chips, I believe, are in it. To be fair, it's just the name Raytheon is such a good, shady defense industry.
Yeah.
Like, it's the name of a company that ends the world, right? Like, you're talking about, like a, they're going to make a Skynet that kills us all at some point. Their name is just too on point to not be. Yeah. So back to Limbaugh. Rush was popular in Pittsburgh, and his bosses appreciated everything but his long-windedness. They repeatedly sent him memos that stated, "Shut up and play the records." And for a while, he was content to mostly just do that. But in 1974, the economy took a nosedive, and Rush was fired. He had to move back home with his family, where he lived for 7 miserable months. His dad repeatedly badgered him to move on and start a real career. But Rush was committed to radio, and eventually he landed a new gig in Kansas City, where he started taking listener phone calls for the first time. This was the dawn of the era of insult comedy, a sort of mean-spirited comedy based on pranks and, primarily executed by shock jocks, guys embodied by Howard Stern, really, who entertained via ostentatious cruelty. Hungry for success.
Can I ask you this? I'm sorry,
Yeah,
and I don't know if you'll know or not. Like talk radio. How much of a thing is it at this point of people calling in to radio stations to have conversations with broadcasters?
It's starting at this point, right? This is really kind of the birth of talk radio, and Rush is on the ground floor of that, right?
Does it start with sports, or does it start with issues?
I think it starts with issues. It starts with before what we know as talk radio, you had people who would take calls and talk about politics, both on TV and on the radio. And one of the things that Rush changes, to skip ahead a little bit, is that those guys had mostly been interchangeable, right? They were just sort of fielding calls and engaging with callers. Rush, and that kind of turns into, with these shock jocks, more of kind of a comedy-based entertainment. You have these pranks, you have insults, you have all this stuff. So it kind of, it evolves out of a thing that had been going on for much longer.
Right. It's an extension of the idea of the original idea of the DJ was maybe a personality, but his main thrust was, I'm giving you this music that you crave, and that's why you like it, is because I'm gonna maybe get tracks before other people get them, and you're gonna hear this stuff first. But there's still a thing of, it's not about my personality necessarily. It's mainly about I'm the Santa Claus of music. I'm giving you these things.
Yes.
And that's why you like it.
Yes. And I have access to them first and all this stuff. Yeah.
Right.
So Rush kind of, as this, he kind of sees the writing on the wall, right? He loses his gig as a traditional DJ because that is starting to become less profitable, right? And there's, in general, the economy is taking a shitter. So he realizes that kind of the way things are going is more based around personalities and comedy and entertaining people, and he starts to pivot to that. So this is there's an interesting quote that Rush himself wrote in one of his many interminable books about how he felt about kind of pivoting to insult comedy. Quote, I found out something about myself, something that was quite disturbing. I found out I was really, really good at insulting people. For example, the topic one day was, when you die, how do you want to go? I want to go the cheapest and most natural way I can, one nice lady caller from Independence, Missouri said. My response was, easy, have your husband throw you in a trash bag and then in the Missouri River with the rest of the garbage. When I went home after a day of this, I didn't like myself.
Is that being... I don't know if that's being good at insulting people.
Yeah, that's not really insult. That's just being cruel.
Being ready to insult people.
Yeah. It is, though, one of the things people will state, and I can't categorically say this, but it seems accurate based on my recollections of the show, is even when people would disagree with Rush on the air, he wasn't an asshole to them. Like, he was not cruel to his callers, to their faces, right? He would say cruel things about liberals, but when people would call in, he would not, call them monsters. He would not, He seems to have genuinely not liked insulting people to their faces, or at least over directly insulting people over the phone or whatever. While he was disturbed by this, he was not disturbed by racism, mainly racism against black people. Yeah, here's where we're going. At one point during his call-in show, he claimed he had a black caller, and he claimed to not be able to understand the man's accent. Limbaugh hung up on this black man after saying, "Take that bone out of your nose and call me back." Which is pretty damn racist. I mean, he says it was. We'll get to that. At another point, he asked his audience, have you ever noticed how all composite pictures of wanted criminals resemble Jesse Jackson?
Wow.
Now, during a 1990 interview, after he'd kind of risen to political prominence, Newsweek asked Limbaugh if he thought these statements had been racist. He replied, you may interpret it as that, but I know, honest to God, that's not how I intended it at all. Gee, don't get me in this one. I am the least racist host you'll ever find. Now, if we're going to try to analyze Rush from the length of his career, I think we can say two things. He's probably being honest when he said that he felt bad about insulting callers, because he did not continue to do that. He is probably being dishonest when he says that he's not racist, because he continued to say incredibly fucking racist things about black people consistently throughout his entire career.
Yeah. I mean, the number one indication that someone is racist is when they say they're the least racist. Has that ever been said by a non-racist person?
Usually when someone,
it's always got to be, not only am I not racist, I am the least racist person you're ever going to meet. It's like, maybe don't go that far.
Yeah.
Because it's so easily disproved.
Also followed by the I don't see color people.
I don't see color.
Yeah.
I would say I think most of the people, I don't see color people tend to be performative Obama voters. The I am the least racist person in the world people tend to have strong opinions on why they should be able to say the N-word.
Exactly.
Yes.
Like that would be the split between the right and the left version
There
of
it
that.
is.
Yeah.
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 And both of you are fucking racist, so shut the fuck up.
You mean me and Robert, right?
Yes. She's found out about our opinions on Liechtenstein, which I refuse to apologize for, and the fucking Swedes. My God, the Swedes.
Yeah, you do have issues with the Swedes.
I have huge issues, particularly Blue Swede. What did Uga Chaka mean? Why did you say that at the start of that song? Okay. Sorry. Rush was still, at this point in his career, completely apolitical. His roommate and close friend at the time later told an interviewer, he was scary smart about everything, but I can't recall us talking much about current events. He was funny, though. I was an audience of one. Limbaugh's years in Kansas City were not super successful, and he seems to have recalled them somewhat sourly, as the New York Times summarized. Limbaugh likes to say, everything I did in Kansas City I failed at. He got fired from the station and quit radio forever to become an executive with the Kansas City Royals baseball team. 5 years later, he quit the Royals, convinced his career there was stymied, and went back to radio, this time as a news commentator. Again, he got fired for being too controversial. Also in Kansas City, he married twice, both marriages eventually ending in divorce.
Do we know what the sources of what the type of controversies?
Yes, we're about to get into that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we're about to get into that.
Sorry.
Fucking Paul, come on! So, it was in Kansas City where Rush Limbaugh, conservative commentator, made his first public appearance. After getting pushed out of the Royals, no one really liked him there. He had one friend who was on the team, and that's why he got to keep the job, and when that guy got traded, they pushed him out because they all hated him. So after getting pushed out of the Royals, he got a gig at KMBZ, a local station. He started satirizing what he considered to be a left-wing caricature of a right-wing political commentator, right? The initial right-wing Rush Limbaugh was satire. And he was being purposefully controversial and unreasonably extreme in order to make a comedic point. This was a joke initially. This did not go over well with his middle-of-the-road Mormon station manager, but it made Limbaugh popular with his audience. See, Limbaugh had caught on to the fact that radio was in the middle of a revolution. This was the era where the first big shock jocks, men like Don Imus and Howard Stern, began their ascents to stardom. I found a wonderful write-up about this era on Long Reads, which argues that the first radio shock jock was a talk radio star named Joel Pine in the 1950s. And I'm going to quote from this now. We might do an episode on Pine at some point. Quote, his unconventional style, dressed up to dress down pinkos and women's livers and riff on rather than read reports, was neither news nor entertainment. It seemed to be best described, well, the New York Times and Time both did anyway, as an electronic peep show. The personality-free press of the time considered Walter Cronkite the most trusted man in America, and Johnny Carson the funniest. But Pine, with a syndicated show on more than 200 radio outlets, was the most Machiavellian. When it comes to manipulating media, icons of talk author Donna Halper told Smithsonian Magazine, he was the father of them all. Pine briefly descended from his soapbox in the mid-60s for a week's vacation after bringing a gun to his show during the Watts riots, suggesting the world wasn't quite ready for his kind of conservative appeal. So, Pine is doing the Rush Limbaugh bit in the 50s and early 60s, but America is not ready for that yet, right? Even 50s Americans like, this guy's racist and a fucking lunatic. Yeah.
So now, just so I understand, Rush's this satire that he was doing.
Yeah.
The idea was here is what left-wing people think right-wing people are like. And the point he is trying to make is they see us as the left wing sees the right wing as extreme and hateful and racist and closed-minded. Like, is that the point he was trying to make?
I think so, because he even says, like, it was a satire, right? Like, that's how it's portrayed in his biography, that he was kind of, his personality was satiric in nature. And that's kind of the only way I can interpret it, is that he was trying to satirize what, like, kind of the loony right-winger, you know?
Okay, but through the lens of here's how the left sees them?
That was never said directly.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a protective phrase of, like, I was not satirizing these guys directly. I was not satirizing right-wing people. I was satirizing how left-wing people see right-wing people.
Yes. That is how I have interpreted what I've read, yeah.
Okay, yeah. That does sound like a base covering kind of thing.
Yeah, a bit. I do think he started not believing everything he said. It started as a joke and him intentionally to provoke controversy, because controversy brings in listeners and gets attention, gets word of mouth. That's why he was doing it. And the story of Rush Limbaugh is these kind of purposefully, absurdly extreme satire becomes what he really believes and is, you know?
Yes. So he's an apolitical guy who's like, this is what politics sounds like to me, I guess.
Yeah, I think so, and that's how I interpret it. We'll go over that more. So obviously, Pine, kind of the first right-wing radio shock jock, had peaked too early. It kind of, I guess, to steal a phrase from the Nazis, shown his power level too early during the Watts riots, and he got kicked off the air. Rush, though, started getting political at exactly the perfect time. This was the early 1980s. Howard Stern came onto the scene in 84. Don Imus had risen to prominence in the 1970s. Imus was another guy my dad listened to a lot growing up. Imus in the morning was like a big part of getting ready for school. Don Imus is going to be on the fucking TV.
And you were like, this guy's having so much fun and I have to go to prison.
I have to go to prison. This guy's having fun. He's talking about nappy-headed hoes, which was like the phrase that I forget what it was in reference to, but like that's what got him in trouble.
It was a women's basketball team.
Yeah, it was a women's basketball team. Because Don Imus was also very racist.
Sure.
So yeah, the world was still not quite ready for the Rush Limbaugh we knew while he was like starting to be political at KMBZ, but a diet version of what he would become was now acceptable. And one man who recognized the potential of Limbaugh's shtick was Norm Woodruff, a consultant to the station who became the acting program director at Sacramento's KFBK network. KFBK needed a new right-wing talk radio host after firing their previous one, a guy you mentioned at the start of this episode named Morton Downey Jr. Morton was extremely popular, and he was very extreme in his antics. This had allowed his local station in Sacramento to repeatedly draw national attention because he would say purposefully controversial things. This did backfire on Morton eventually when he told a racist on-air joke about a Chinaman, which was a thinly veiled attack on a local city councilman named Tom Chin. Downey Jr. was fired and went into the world of television, where he would somehow simultaneously blaze a trail for both Tucker Carlson and Jerry Springer. We will do an episode on him someday, because he's a very influential guy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But for today, he matters because his firing, number one, his success proved that being a purposefully controversial right-wing bigot was really profitable for a radio station, and because when he got fired, Sacramento had a hole in the station's roster that they needed to fill with another racist right-wing shithead, just one who was not quite as racist as Morton Downey Jr. Rush Limbaugh stepped up and said, "Not being quite as racist as that guy is my middle name."
For now.
For now. Eventually, I will be much worse. So, Rush Limbaugh moved to Sacramento. When he started at the station, his new boss, Woodruff, told him, "We want controversy, but don't make it up. If you actually think something, if you actually believe it, you can tell people why. We'll back you up. But if you're going to say stuff just to make people mad, if all you want to do is rabble-rouse, if all you want to do is offend and get noticed, that's not what we're interested in, and we won't back you up." He was clearly lying. I think this was ass covering by the station, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but they would never ever push back on his bigotry. But you know who does push back on bigotry, Paul?
Ads?
Yeah.
The products and services that support this podcast.
Life comes at you fast, which is why it's important to find some time to relax. A little you time. Enter Chumba Casino with no download required. You can jump on anytime, anywhere for the chance to redeem some serious prizes. So treat yourself with Chumba Casino. Over 100 online casino-style games, all for free. Go to ChumbaCasino.com to collect your free welcome bonus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms.
I'm trying to find quality brake service.
Look no further than Big O.
How about oil changes?
Big O.
Or new wheels?
Big O.
Struts?
Yep, Big O.
Alignments?
We do those too.
Shocks?
Big O.
Inspections?
Big O's for place.
Fluid changes?
Yep.
Batteries?
Yep.
Even filter changes?
See.
And the best tires on the road?
Of course, Big O's got it. Get everything you need only at your locally owned Big O Tires.
Amazon Pharmacy presents Painful Thoughts.
The guy in front of me in the pharmacy line is halfway through an incredibly detailed 17-minute story about his gout. A story painful than the gout itself.
Next time, save yourself the pain. Let Amazon Pharmacy deliver your meds right to your door. Amazon Pharmacy. Healthcare just got less pain.
The following is a high-five moment from highfivecasino.com.
I won! Yahoo! Private, put down your phone. This is the Army.
Sarge, High Five Casino is a social casino. It's on your phone. Goes wherever you go. I win free spins, cash, prizes, free daily rewards, over 1,200 games. I won again.
Platoon, present cell phone. High Five. High Five. Casino. Casino. Win at High Five Casino. And download the High Five app.
High Five Casino is a social casino. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Play responsibly. Conditions apply. See website for details.
High Five Casino.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on what your kids are spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely. And parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/iHeart.
So, we're back. And at this point, Rush Limbaugh has launched himself as a right-wing shock jock, and he is an instant hit. Zeev Chaffetz writes, quote, "The station let him go on the air solo, unencumbered by sidekicks or guests, and encouraged his highly personal right-wing monologues. For the first time in his career, he was marketed heavily and aggressively. There were billboards around town showing a finger hitting a button, captioned, 'How would you like to punch Rush Limbaugh?' Rush was so pleased by these that he sent Brian a snapshot. Morton Downey Jr. had been a big star in Sacramento, with a 5% share of the market, 5% of people listening to the radio in a given 15-minute segment. Limbaugh tripled that. He was sharp-edged, but good-humored. The new morning host espouses many of the same beliefs of his predecessor, Morton Downey Jr., reported the Sacramento Bee, but he skates a little further from the edge of the hole in the ice. Rush was rewarded for his success with a 6-figure salary, an estimable income in the mid-1980s, even by his father's standards. More important, for the first time in his life, he really mattered. He was invited to deliver speeches, just like Big Rush. He was an occasional commentator on television and wrote newspaper columns. Politicians and celebrities sought him out. He and Michelle, his wife at the time, bought a new house and furnished it with products he endorsed on air. So, he's a hit! You know, this is the start of, and it's really just almost straight up from there for the rest of his career.
Right.
He finds his niche and he runs with it.
Yeah.
Again, he's a very intelligent, talented man.
Yeah.
Anybody else still find the Big Rush part really funny?
It is very funny. It's very funny.
An hour in, it's still funny.
Yeah. Now, I have long argued that Sacramento is the very mouth of hell itself, and the fact that Rush Limbaugh first saw success as a right-wing firebrand there serves to support my hypothesis. Again, his conscious decision as an entertainer was to be a satirical version of a right-wing polemicist, deliberately exaggerating the things he did believe for comedic effect. The audience thought he was funny, but I don't think they got the joke, and there is some evidence for this. When an Ohio evangelist
I would say there's a ton
a lot of evidence. Yeah. So I think the earliest evidence for this, I should say, is when an Ohio evangelist very publicly claimed that the theme song from Mr. Ed held a satanic message when played backwards. You know, we're kind of talking about the satanic panic period during this. Rush found this ridiculous, and again, he had a long history of mocking the evangelical religious right. So when he heard this, he told his listeners that a Slim Whitman recording also contained a backwards message from Satan. Zeev Chaffetz writes that, to his delight, many Limbaugh listeners took Limbaugh at his word and flooded the station with phone calls promising to destroy their Slim Whitman albums to keep the devil out of the house. Rush considered this a hilarious prank. He did not apologize or, as far as I know, correct the record. So we see in this, he's joking, right? He is not, again, his whole history is mocking these people.
Yeah.
He does not believe this, but he doesn't correct people because he realizes, oh, they're engaged, they're destroying stuff. That means I have power, right? I think he even found it might have been something that kind of addicted him to this idea that, like, I can make, even if I'm deliberately being absurd and lying, I can make people take action based on those absurdities. That's got to be addictive, and I think it is for him.
It is absolutely undeniable, and especially, like, if you spend time on Twitter, and if you've ever been, like I have on occasion, deliberately stupid on Twitter and gotten sincere replies to something that is so obviously a joke. It absolutely is fun. There's no way around it. There's no way around it. Seeing people take you at your word when you say something that's so patently absurd it's joyful. It does give you like a real jolt.
And this is a bit of a different case, but I think there's some similarities. So last summer, I was covering a lot of the protests in Portland, Oregon, including doing a lot of live streaming. And very early on, the police put a fence up around the police station. And there would be marches where like a couple of thousand people would march to the fence, and somebody would like touch the fence, and the police would tear gas like 6 square blocks of traffic. And I started calling it the sacred fence. And the joke, like the comment that I was making, is that the police are endangering the lives of thousands of citizens to protect a fence because it's sacred to them, right? Yeah. That went viral within the city, and there were dozens of protests at the sacred fence, as everyone called it, including numerous attempts to tear it down. And I know that the way that I framed it had a significant impact on a lot of people getting hurt, damaging the fence, getting arrested. And it was both kind of intoxicating, and it also scared the hell out of me. It was one of the reasons why I pulled back to some extent on some aspects of my coverage, because I got really worried about the kind of impact that you can have on people by doing that sort of thing. I didn't want to be... It was very concerning to me, but it was also, I'd be lying if I said there wasn't an element of it that I wanted to do more stuff like that. And I didn't, but I wanted to,
But that is the key difference of you seeing something that catches fire in a forgive the phrasing, but catches fire in a charged situation, and how easily people can glom onto something when everything's so churned up, and then realizing like, oh, words have power, I have to be careful, rather than words have power, here we go!
Here we go! Let's use it to sell gold. So Rush's domestic life, while he's enjoying all of this professional success, his domestic life with his, I think she was his third wife, actually. I don't know. He had a lot of wives. I think this was his second wife. His domestic life with his second wife at this period was less than joyful. He was famous and popular, constantly feted for dinners and invited to big events, and his wife, Michelle, was much less successful. She quit her job to be his assistant, but she hated hated the work.
God, that sounds horrible.
It's a nightmare.
That gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah. They were not a good fit. Michelle loved the outdoors. Rush Limbaugh despised them. Two of his colleagues tell a story from around this time of how they convinced him to go rafting once that I think is telling about Rush Limbaugh's personality. So this is one of Rush's friends talking about at the time they took Rush Limbaugh on a rafting trip in whatever river it is that goes through Sacramento. Quote, "It's a very, very mild ride. Bob gave Rush an oar and told him to Oh, you're going to really love this.
I love the opening thing. Look, here's what you have to know. Before I start the story, you have to know.
We're on a baby river.
Yeah, exactly.
Bob